Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that the thought of betrayal felt impossible, until it wasn't? My name is Derek Hollis. I'm 44, a cybersecurity consultant, and until 2 weeks ago, I thought my biggest worries were project deadlines and missed birthdays. I believed in structure, planning, building a future brick by brick with someone I called my partner. My wife Camille was the unpredictable half of our equation. Warm, magnetic, unapologetically spontaneous. She brought energy into every room, every conversation, and for 15 years I thought that was enough. But that belief shattered the morning I received a voicemail that began with her laughing and ended with her saying she'd freed herself. Then came the notification from our bank. The retirement accounts were gone. Over $600,000. Liquidated. No explanation, no warning. Just a video of Camille poolside in Scottsdale, Arizona, wearing a designer swimsuit I'd never seen, sipping champagne beside a man I didn't know. I used to track cybercriminals. Now I was tracking my own wife. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's a story about preparation, justice, and what happens when the person who thought they were playing the game realizes they were the pawn all along. I met Camille at a networking event in downtown Austin. She was 30, sharp-witted, and wearing a red blazer like it was armor. I was in my usual dark gray suit, the kind that blends into hotel conference rooms. She sold luxury real estate. I worked in cybersecurity infrastructure for mid-size financial firms. I was drawn to her. Immediately, not just her looks, but the way she moved through a room like she'd already been introduced to everyone. She didn't speak to impress, but when she did speak, people leaned in. Our first real conversation was over lukewarm coffee and dry pastries. I remember telling her that I preferred systems to people. She laughed and told me she'd spent her entire adult life decoding people's systems. That line stuck with me. It felt clever at the time. We married 6 months later. Fast, yes. But at the time, it felt inevitable. I was methodical, cautious by nature, but Camille had a way of sweeping through doubt. She brought a kind of urgency to life that felt exciting. She used to say, "You build the map, I'll find the shortcuts." For years, that rhythm worked. I focused on structure. I maximized our retirement contributions, invested early in tech, funds, purchased our first home right before Austin's housing boom. I set up an LLC for my consulting work and gradually built a client base that gave us more financial flexibility than most couples our age. Camille, meanwhile, excelled at turning weekends into memories. She planned spontaneous getaways to wine, country, through dinner parties that somehow brought together CEOs and artists and made it all seem effortless. If I'm honest, she was a big part of why I got invited to the bigger tables. She understood charm in a way I never would. She called it relational capital. But even in those early years, there were signs we operated on different wavelengths. I would spend hours organizing our budget spreadsheets and investment portfolios. She would skim them and ask only one question. "Are we good?" I always said. Yes, it wasn't that she was irresponsible. She just didn't care about the details. When we bought our second home, a sleek, modern build with wide glass panels and a rooftop patio, she chose every fixture, every fabric, every piece of art. I signed the checks. It was an unspoken agreement. I handled the logic. She handled the life. We never fought about money. At least not directly. But sometimes, late at night when I'd bring up long-term planning, she'd get quiet. Then she'd pivot. Talk about her next listing or an influencer she wanted to partner with. It became a pattern. My questions were too heavy, hers too light. Still, we kept going. I thought love meant balancing each other's gaps. I didn't realize until much later that some of those gaps were cracks. 5 years into the marriage, Camille landed a massive commission on a downtown high-rise penthouse. The celebration lasted a week. New jewelry, a reservation at a members-only club. I told myself she deserved it, that we both did, but I noticed that something had shifted. She started spending more time at client events. Long lunches turned into overnight trips. I stopped asking for details when she started giving fewer of them. When I mentioned it, she brushed it off. "You're just not used to the rhythm of high-end sales," she'd say. "This is what the top tier looks like." I wanted to believe her. I was still in the rhythm of structure. I had just renewed our umbrella insurance policy. I was restructuring our SEP IRA contributions to reduce tax exposure. I had no idea she was already playing a different game. Looking back, I see now how subtly things changed. Her Instagram went from professional to curated glamour. There were fewer photos of us and more shots of luxury interiors, spa balconies, and cryptic captions. She started following accounts run by personal brand coaches and feminine energy influencers. At one point, she suggested we host a retreat at our lake house, a wellness meets wealth weekend for entrepreneurial women. I built her a custom registration site, set up payment processing, and offered to do security checks on guest data. She smiled and said, "You're too corporate. This isn't that kind of event." The retreat never happened, or maybe it did. I never really got a straight answer. Through it all, I kept doing what I'd always done, managing our financial health like a long-term asset. I believed the numbers would protect us. What I didn't see was that Camille had stopped thinking of us as a joint asset at all. It's strange how you can live alongside someone for years and miss the fact that they've been quietly building an exit strategy. She hadn't packed bags or closed credit cards. She'd done something far more elegant. She'd withdrawn emotionally, invested socially, and repositioned herself for a different life, all while smiling at dinner and asking if I wanted wine with the salmon. I was still in love with the idea of Camille, but I was also starting to feel a low, humming anxiety that wouldn't go away. I chalked it up to stress, aging, market volatility, anything but what it actually was. That denial held until the voicemail came, and the poolside video. And the moment I realized that the woman I'd built a life with hadn't just walked away from it, she'd cashed it out. After the shock of Camille's video wore off, if it ever really did, I found myself walking back through the past year, searching for the threads I had ignored. When you live with someone long enough, you learn to filter what hurts. You call it giving them space. You convince yourself it's normal. But looking back, the signs weren't subtle. They were systemic. It started with a weekend trip to Sedona she took with a few women from a mastermind group. "We're unplugging," she said, laughing as she packed silk robes and supplements. I believed her. Camille had always thrived in curated chaos, and I'd learned early on not to stand in the way of her freedom. But that was the first trip where she didn't call, not even a text, until she was already on her way home. When I asked about it, she waved it off, said the Wi-Fi was spotty, and they were doing a no-phone thing. Then came the restaurant. Charges. Small at first. Juice bars, cafes, boutique hotels I didn't recognize. I ran a software scan on our shared credit card. The data showed an unusual spending pattern, mostly in neighborhoods where Camille didn't work. I asked her once, casually. "Client dinners," she said. "You wouldn't believe how much ego I have to wine and dine just to get a listing." I smiled, but I noted the date and time of each one. Then I started saving the receipts. About a month later, I walked past her office and saw her FaceTiming with someone. She didn't see me. I didn't hear what was said, but I saw how she smiled, soft and playful, the way she used to smile at me. When I asked who it was, she closed the laptop quickly. "A vendor," she said. "He's pitching staging ideas." I didn't push. I didn't want to push. That's the thing about suspicion. It can feel like betrayal, even when you're not the one lying. The name Trevor Lane came up not long after that. Camille mentioned him offhandedly one evening. "Oh, Trevor's startup just launched a partnership with a big VC," she said. "We're thinking of collaborating on a branded property campaign." I asked what he did. "Tech adjacent," she replied. "Super smart guy, really inspiring." The way she said it sat wrong with me. Not because of what she said, but how little she did. I did my own digging. Trevor Lane was the co-founder of a boutique marketing firm that had rebranded 3 times in 4 years. He wasn't exactly obscure. His name came up on a few startup podcasts, and his LinkedIn was full of hustle speak and buzzwords like emotional, ROI. But what caught my attention was the network around him. Mostly women in upper income brackets, nearly all of whom had, at one point, collaborated with him and then vanished from his online presence entirely. A few appeared in early Testimonials, none were there now. Around that time, Camille began spending weekends away on business. I knew enough about her work to know that luxury real estate didn't require last-minute Sunday flights to Phoenix or Santa Fe. But she'd grown defensive. "You're not used to what it means to scale," she said. "This is part of the next level." The phrase made me pause. Next level of what? Our life? Or hers? I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I turned to what I knew. Data. I installed passive monitoring on our joint devices. Not spyware, nothing illegal, just signal logs, metadata, location pings from shared accounts that hadn't been fully unlinked. I didn't need to read her texts to know something was wrong. The pattern spoke louder than words. She'd spent 6 weekends in Scottsdale in the past 3 months, none of which matched the calendar she'd shared with me. The transactions grew larger, more erratic. Designer boutiques, a transfer to a consulting agency that didn't seem to exist, charges from a high-end car rental service. Her business account, which I'd helped her structure years ago, was suddenly showing zero balance. Meanwhile, her energy shifted. She was more detached, more curated. It was like she was constantly auditioning for something I wasn't invited to. She stopped touching me casually. No more goodnight forehead kisses. No more Sunday mornings making breakfast in silence. Even her wardrobe changed, less cozy, more deliberate. Not for comfort, but for display. And then came the wellness retreat. She told me it was in Big Sur. It's a private property, no cell signal, off the grid, very hush-hush. That was on a Thursday. By Saturday morning, my phone pinged with a login attempt from our joint investment account. I'd set up multi-factor authentication months earlier without telling her. The access was blocked, but that wasn't the disturbing part. What followed was a series of attempts, each one more aggressive. Password resets, email verifications. At one point, she even tried to change the phone number associated with the account. When I didn't react, she stopped trying. On Monday, she returned home with a tan, a new bracelet, and no mention of the retreat. I asked how it went. "Transformative," she said, her voice light. "I'll tell you about it later." She never did. By then, I was already assembling a file. I called Tessa Graham, a former FBI cybercrime advisor I'd worked with on a ransomware case 2 years ago. I didn't give her the details, just asked if she could help me trace a few financial anomalies. "Domestic fraud?" she asked. I hesitated, then said, "Something like that." Tessa helped me confirm what I already feared. Funds were being moved into an LLC registered in Arizona. The entity had been set up 6 months earlier. Its mailing address was a rented box at a UPS store near downtown Scottsdale. The business owner listed, Trevor Lane. The next day, Camille left for another networking summit. That's when I got the voicemail. Laughter, wind, a clink of glass. "I've done something I should have done years ago," she said, her voice dancing. "I've freed myself, and I hope you land on your feet, Derek. I really do." The call ended, and so did the illusion that I had any idea who my wife really was. When the voicemail ended, I didn't move for a full minute. It wasn't just the words. It was the ease in her voice, the champagne-soaked joy of someone who believed she had not only escaped, but won. Camille wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't apologizing or even explaining. She'd made her move, and she thought I was too slow to follow. I logged into our main investment dashboard. What I saw confirmed my worst-case scenario. Nearly $650,000 had been liquidated from 3 different long-term accounts, 2 in both our names, 1 in her name only, but previously earmarked for our post-45 pivot, the early retirement plan we'd dreamed about for years. The withdrawals were routed in overlapping transactions, most of them just under the reporting threshold. It was professional, precise. This wasn't someone recklessly emptying accounts in a panic. This was calculated, advised. I didn't call her. I didn't text. I didn't scream or throw anything. I opened a folder labeled Contingency Red in my cloud drive, something I had created nearly a year ago when I first began sensing shifts I couldn't explain away. Inside were scanned copies of all our shared documents, login data, asset maps, prenup terms, and a list of legal and forensic contacts I'd trusted from work. I had hoped I'd never need it, but I'd built it like I build everything, quietly, thoroughly, and in advance. First, I froze all shared accounts. I notified our financial institutions that fraudulent withdrawals had occurred and requested full transaction histories and temporary holds. Next, I initiated a trace with the help of a financial analyst I knew through a consulting client. Her name was Nadine. She'd handled internal theft cases at 2 Fortune 100 firms and had a gift for following money through shadow trails. When I sent her Camille's recent financial data, Nadine's first message was simple. She had help. The accounts were routed through layered transfers, with several ending up in a corporate fund registered to Lane Meridian LLC. It sounded official. In reality, it was a shell company, an LLC Camille had signed for as a consultant 5 months earlier. Trevor Lane was listed as the managing member. Nadine confirmed it was tied to a short list of known grooming fraud patterns, charm-based cons where women were manipulated into leveraging shared assets under the guise of personal or professional freedom. Camille hadn't just betrayed me. She'd been played. And I was about to play back. I met with my attorney, Joel Stein, the next morning. Joel was the kind of man who didn't blink at numbers and never flinched at conflict. I gave him the full outline, including the video, the transactions, and the LLC data. We'll hit this on 2 fronts, he said. Asset protection and criminal exposure. She forged authorizations? Most likely. I haven't signed a thing in 6 months. He nodded. Then we trigger a fraud investigation through the bank and prep for a civil suit with criminal referrals attached. By that evening, our entire financial structure had been refortified. My LLC was separated legally from marital property, via a clause Camille had signed but never read, something I'd buried in the operating agreement when I brought her in on a client-facing retreat series 2 years ago. She'd agreed to indemnify me from all risk. I had banked on her not noticing the fine print. She hadn't. Now it was time for the digital cleanup. I wiped all devices of shared credentials, changed passwords, re-encrypted everything. I contacted my firm's internal risk team and flagged my personal accounts for high alert monitoring. In 24 hours, I turned our joint infrastructure into a digital vault she could no longer access, even if she tried. Then I waited. Camille didn't reach out, not immediately, but Trevor did. He emailed me directly using a burner address with the subject line, "No hard feelings." The message was brief. "Derek, these things happen. I'd appreciate your discretion. Camille's happiness matters. Let's be adults about this." It was a trap. I didn't reply. I forwarded the message to Joel, who flagged it as attempted coercion. 3 days later, Camille sent a single message. "We need to talk. There are things you don't understand." I didn't respond. Instead, I escalated the fraud claim with our bank. The investigator assigned to our case called that same afternoon. "Sir, we're seeing a coordinated pattern of activity suggesting forged consent. We'll be freezing the disputed funds and launching a formal inquiry." That was the trigger. Within 48 hours, the account Camille had dumped our money into was frozen. Trevor's LLC was flagged for regulatory review. I could practically hear the glass of champagne slipping from her hand across state lines. Then came the call from Tessa. She had finished the digital trace. "Derek," she said, "Trevor's done this before, twice at least. Same playbook. Upper-income women, usually married, usually discontent. He positions himself as a partner, pulls them into some vague but exciting investment, then leverages their access to assets. He walks away with cash and a clean record. The women? Most of them are too embarrassed to press charges. One's still paying restitution to her ex-husband." I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was never just about infidelity. This was financial predation. Camille hadn't just fallen in love with the wrong man. She'd been recruited, softened, and turned into a funnel. "I want to stop him," I said. Not just protect my money, I want it documented, official, I want it public. Tessa paused. Then we go full forensic. Build the timeline, map the transactions, and submit a fraud package to federal investigators. But if you do this, Derek, it becomes war. It already was. I began compiling every piece of digital evidence, transaction reports, GPS logs, voice messages, screenshots. I even found a promotional video Camille had shared privately to a potential investor group, Trevor in the background, feeding her lines. She looked euphoric, like she was on the verge of something revolutionary. The tragedy was that she just didn't realize she was the product. I watched the video twice, then saved it under the file name, Proof of Intent. That night I stood in the kitchen we had remodeled together 2 summers ago, her backsplash my layout, and made a list. Everything that would change, everything I was reclaiming. She had taken the money, but I had taken the lead. The next step wasn't revenge, it was exposure. And it was coming. Camille came back 4 days later. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and unremarkable, the kind of day you forget unless something explodes inside it. I had just finished a call with Joel, finalizing the civil fraud documentation. When the doorbell rang, I looked through the camera feed and there she was, standing on the front step like nothing had happened. Hair perfectly styled, oversized sunglasses, the kind of travel bag that screamed curated elegance rather than panic. I opened the door, not out of curiosity, but because I was ready. I'd rehearsed this moment in my mind more times than I cared to admit. "Can we talk?" she asked, stepping past me without waiting for an answer. She walked into the living room like she still owned it. For a second it hit me. The ease of entitlement. The quiet arrogance of someone who never imagined they'd be caught. That, more than anything, fueled my resolve. "You've been busy," I said evenly. She glanced around, noticing that half the photos were gone, the framed wedding print above the fireplace replaced with a minimalist canvas. "I didn't want it to come to this," she began. "But things changed, I changed. Trevor helped me see that." "Helped you see what?" I asked. "That liquidating our retirement accounts behind my back was liberation?" Her smile faltered. "I was going to explain." "No, you were going to disappear," I said, cutting her off. "And you would have gotten away with it if I hadn't prepared." She exhaled, moved to sit down, then hesitated. "I made a mistake. But it wasn't malicious. I was unhappy, Derek. You were always managing, always in control. Trevor made me feel seen." "You're not the first woman he's made feel that way," I replied. "He's done this twice before. Both women drained assets for him. Both left with nothing." That hit her. She blinked slowly. "What are you talking about?" I handed her a printed report. Tessa's summary of Trevor's known aliases, the financial movements, the former victims' statements. She read in silence. The color in her face drained. "No," she whispered. "That's not possible. He told you what you needed to hear," I said. "It's what he does. You weren't his partner. You were his next withdrawal." She stood quickly, the paper falling from her hand. "You don't understand. Trevor believed in me. He said we were building something real." "You were building something," I said. "An investigation." Her eyes narrowed. "You set me up." I shook my head. "No, I protected myself. You just walked into it." She started pacing, hands trembling now. "You can't prove I forged those forms." "The bank can," I said. "And they already have. Every document, every IP address, the timestamps, your voice memo from Scottsdale. Camille, this isn't just a bad decision. This is fraud." She turned on me then, voice rising. "You're trying to destroy me." "I'm trying to stop you from destroying me," I replied. The silence stretched between us. She sat down slowly, a different kind of stillness in her eyes now. The panic was being replaced by something colder. Calculation. "What do you want?" she asked. "To end this legally, efficiently, transparently." "And Trevor?" He's already being investigated. His LLC is under regulatory review. You should start cooperating now before this escalates beyond civil court." Camille looked away. For the first time, she seemed unsure of who she'd chosen. Or why. The next morning, I got a call from Tessa. "Trevor's off the grid," she said. "Shut down his accounts, deleted social media, VPN activity spiking. He knows we're on to him." That same day, Camille's tone shifted. Her lawyer, young, flashy, the kind who thought courtroom strategy was about volume, sent a letter accusing me of asset concealment. Joel responded with 37 pages of evidence. Within hours, the threats stopped. Over the next 2 weeks, Camille tried every tactic in the playbook: anger, pleading, nostalgia. She sent me a playlist of our songs. She mailed me a framed photo of us from Paris with a handwritten note that said, "Do we really want to end this in court?" I didn't respond, because by then the story had moved beyond her. We discovered that Trevor had ties to 3 additional women. One of them, Amanda Keller, reached out through a private investigator after reading my attorney's filing. Her story was almost identical. Charming man, bold ideas, quick romance, sudden interest in merging finances. She'd lost nearly $120,000. No charges filed, no restitution, just shame and silence. We met in person. Amanda brought a folder thicker than mine, screenshots, chat logs, transfer records. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a blueprint. Trevor wasn't just manipulative, he was deliberate, and very likely criminal. Joel contacted the district attorney's office. We submitted everything. By week's end, a federal fraud inquiry was underway. Trevor's name had been passed to 2 regulatory bodies and a financial crimes task force. Camille, faced with mounting pressure, agreed to a deposition. Her tone was clipped, exhausted. She spoke like someone who had already burned every excuse. She had. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. "That's the problem," I replied. "You never thought past yourself." The deposition was recorded. Joel had arranged for the transcript to be admissible in both civil and criminal proceedings. Camille outlined her communications with Trevor, the paperwork she'd been encouraged to sign, the digital access she'd granted him. It was more than we needed. She had implicated him and herself. Afterward, as she gathered her things, she looked at me and said quietly, "I thought I was escaping a prison. I didn't know I was stepping into one. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to." By the end of that month, our assets were unfrozen, my portion secured through a temporary injunction. Camille's access was restricted pending the outcome of litigation. Trevor was subpoenaed but failed to appear. A bench warrant was issued. The man who'd once written me an email beginning with "no hard feelings" had become a ghost. But the damage was real, and not all of it could be reversed. I had spent 15 years building a life with Camille, and in 6 months, she'd dismantled it, with a smile, a signature, and a con man's whisper in her ear. But I hadn't just watched it fall. I had rebuilt it bolt by bolt behind a firewall she never saw coming. 6 weeks later, we were sitting across from each other in the same courtroom where we had once signed our prenup, the one she barely read, and I had quietly revised over the years. This time there was no laughter, no champagne toast after the meeting, just 2 people, on opposite ends of a long table, waiting for a judge to decide how the story would officially end. Camille wore a muted gray blazer, her hair tied, back makeup minimal. She looked smaller, not physically but spiritually, stripped of the glow, the edge, the polished persona she wore like armor for so long. Trevor was absent. His attorney had withdrawn from the case 2 days before. The latest federal filing named him as a person of interest in 3 financial fraud investigations. Last anyone had seen, he'd liquidated what remained of his accounts and left the country under a different name. Camille turned on him the week prior. Quietly, but completely. Her deposition had been supplemented with emails, texts, and even a bank surveillance screenshot showing her depositing checks into the Lane Meridian account. It was enough to reduce her exposure from active fraud to complicity through coercion. Joel negotiated a plea deal for her in exchange for full cooperation, which she accepted. She would avoid prison, but she would carry restitution payments for years. The judge's ruling was swift and clear. Camille forfeited all claims to the marital business assets. The LLC I built remained wholly mine. The liquidated retirement funds, what remained of them, were to be split, but with my restored share adjusted upward due to evidence of fraud. The house was sold. The proceeds were placed into escrow to cover legal fees, taxes, and recovery costs. I walked away with 82% of our total holdings. Camille left with debt, limited credit, and no leverage. As for Trevor, the dominoes kept falling. Amanda Keller and 2 other women joined a joint civil suit against him. One of them, a former biotech executive, had been on the brink of bankruptcy because of his influence. Together, they formed a legal coalition under the guidance of Joel's office. I wasn't seeking revenge by then. What I wanted was precedent, a clear record that men like Trevor didn't just disappear into another persona when the damage was done. Meanwhile, I rebuilt. I moved to Seattle, a city I'd always admired for its mix of edge and restraint. I leased a modest condo with clean lines and natural light, the kind of place where every object felt intentional. I spent the first few weeks in solitude, not grieving, not brooding, but breathing, waking up without checking account notifications, going to bed without a silent, nagging fear that something important was unraveling behind my back. My consulting work expanded. Ironically, word spread in the industry that I had deep expertise in personal cyber fraud. One of my clients, a private equity group, asked me to speak on a panel about digital resilience and interpersonal risk. The event opened doors I hadn't planned for. Guest lectures, a podcast, a new business model focused on protecting individuals, not just companies, from betrayal wrapped in charm. And yet, for all the forward momentum, I still had to reconcile the quiet moments. Like walking into a coffee shop and smelling the exact perfume Camille used to wear, or hearing someone laugh in the way she once did when she was still mine. Those were the ghosts I didn't see coming. Not the financial losses, not the legal maze, but the fragments of familiarity I'd never get to trust again. One evening, I received a letter in the mail, no return address. Inside was a single sheet of unlined paper, in Camille's handwriting. I don't know who I was when I met Trevor, but I know who I became. I don't expect forgiveness. But I needed you to know, I see it now, I was never freeing myself. I was running from something I helped build, and you were the only one who ever tried to hold it together. There was no apology, just a realization, and strangely that felt more honest than anything she'd said in our final months. I didn't write back. Instead, I framed the letter, not to display but to file. It sits in my office in a drawer marked archived, next to the legal settlement and a copy of our original prenup. A paper trail of what happens when people forget that love without accountability becomes a liability. A few months later, I began seeing someone. Her name is Claire. She's a project manager with her own consulting firm. Smart, emotionally fluent, no interest in glamour or games. We're taking it slow. There are no grand declarations, no curated perfection. Just honesty. Questions without suspicion. Answers without agendas. And for the first time in years, I feel like I'm not editing myself to keep the peace. The past hasn't disappeared, but it's no longer driving the narrative. Sometimes I still think about Camille, not with longing or anger, but with clarity. She was the perfect storm for the man I used to be, and I was the perfect blind spot for the woman she became. We weren't doomed. We were just unfinished, rushing into a version of life neither of us had the emotional tools to maintain. And when that version collapsed, we both reached for control in different ways. I used spreadsheets and strategy. She used charm and escape routes. Only one of those paths led back to stability. The last I heard, Camille had moved back to Colorado Springs working part-time as a luxury leasing agent. The same circles, but with less shine. She's reportedly dating someone new. I hope he's kind, I hope she's honest, but that's no longer my concern. Justice, I've come to understand, isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about balance, a reckoning between what was taken and what was learned, what was broken and what was rebuilt. In that equation, I came out ahead, not just financially, but internally, stronger, sharper, less willing to surrender, to charm in place of character. Camille thought she'd emptied my life when she drained those accounts. But she only stripped away the illusion. What remained after the courts, the investigations, the paper trails and depositions was the one thing neither she nor Trevor could ever steal. Peace. There's a reason why betrayal cuts deeper when it's not just emotional, it's strategic. In cybersecurity, we talk a lot about vulnerabilities, backdoors in systems, weak passwords, unguarded ports. But the most dangerous breaches don't happen in code, they happen in trust. Camille didn't hack into my life overnight. She was granted access over years of small decisions, unchecked assumptions and blind spots I chose to leave unguarded in the name of love. Trevor? He was a predator who knew how to weaponize charm. But predators only succeed where boundaries are absent and accountability is optional. What I learned through all of this is simple but non-negotiable. Love and transparency must coexist. If one disappears, the other turns toxic. If you're in a partnership, romantic or professional, don't outsource awareness. Protect yourself not from love, but from manipulation dressed as freedom, because real freedom doesn't require deception. It requires clarity. So here's a question for you. What's the one thing in your life right now that you trust completely, but haven't checked on in a while? Let me know in the comments. Your story might help someone else wake up before the damage is done, and if this story hit home, subscribe for more real-life lessons in trust, loss, and justice. Your awareness might be your strongest defense.